One of the key elements to our abiding process or remaining in God, like Jesus talked about in John 15, is that we learn to hear God's voice with more and more clarity. In Mark 4, verse 35, Jesus says to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." All the disciples, they got into the boat and they headed to the other side. The wind and the waves, they whipped up. It was crazy and they got all freaked out. They were really freaked out. The boat was filling with water, and while the disciples were freaking out, Jesus just slept, and he slept soundly. So they woke him up. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus rebuked the wind and he rebuked the waves, and he said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have such little faith?" See, this is an amazing exchange. And what's happening here is really important for us in understanding how we hear God's voice. Jesus wasn't fazed in the slightest. He wasn't worried. He knew what the Father was doing because he could hear the voice of God. When I talk about hearing God's voice, I'm not talking about just hearing an audible voice or even the internal audible voice or the still small voice that we'll talk about later. But sometimes it's feelings and sometimes it's intuitions. Jesus always knew what the Father was doing because he had that close and tight relationship with him. And so the Father was leading Jesus and his disciples to the other side, and Jesus knew this. There was no worry because he knew that his Father was in control. See, when the Father says you're going to the other side, you are going to the other side. And the disciples didn't quite get it yet. Jesus did. Jesus spoke the words, "Let us go over to the other side." And he knew without a doubt, because the Father had led him, that they were going to go to the other side. When God speaks it, it is going to happen when we're obedient in it. No question, 100% of the time. If the Father says, "Pray for that child and she will be healed," and you pray for that child, the child is going to be healed. This is important for us to understand because later on we're going to talk about getting feedback in how we hear God's voice. And it's very, very important that we work on that and we get the feedback that we would hear the Father's voice with more clarity. If the Father says, "Rebuke that typhoon and tell it to dissipate," and then I rebuke that typhoon and tell it to dissipate, guess what? That typhoon is going to go. Because when the Father speaks it and we're obedient in walking it out, it is going to happen every single time. This is a key element in how we make declarations. I can't just make a declaration because I want something to happen, but I can make a declaration if I hear the Father speaking it. We can cultivate and we can develop this as we get feedback and we learn to hear God's voice with more and more clarity. If I could have anything in the world, any house that I wanted, $1 trillion, health, divine health every day of my life, the only thing that I would ask for is to hear the Father's voice with the clarity that Jesus did. Because if you can hear the Father's voice with the clarity that Jesus did, your ministry is going to look like Jesus' ministry. And the Father is going to be glorified incredibly on the earth.